Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to Crosswires. It's James here, and this week we have something that I'm sure, or at least I hope, is going to spark a lot of debate in the comments and on the social medias. We're going to be talking crypto, and my guest is already laughing because she knows what's coming to us when we release this episode. We're going to be talking about a little bit about the ethics of cryptocurrency and NFT, maybe the wider blockchain. But before we introduce our guest, let me, as always, welcome my wonderful co-host and co-producer, the lady responsible for our website launching 48 hours earlier than planned. And you know I'm not going to let you forget that anytime soon. By the time this episode comes out, it's January. The website's been up a month or so, but it still came out early. Please welcome Jay.
Well, I mean, if it was on the blockchain, maybe it would be a little more stable. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Don't. Just don't. This is
getting us off to a great start here.
and my guest, who's definitely reconsidering her decision to join the episode, is sorry, Jay. Before I introduce our guest, how are you? Apart from wrecking my show already.
I'm doing good. I'm in a really good mood. I'm happy. I already ate a whole thing of lemonade before I got on here.
Ate?
I mean, drank. You know me and getting things mixed up on words.
Yes. Just for context, by the way, this is early for Jay. This is, well, it's 10 a.m. for Jay, but I think this may be the earliest you've recorded.
Yes, in a long time. There is the one time I recorded a 1 a.m. show. No, 7 a.m. once with a guest from Australia.
Oh, well, there we go. So, our guest this week is someone who's been doing a lot of works in the ethics of emerging technology and has actually been on, wait for it, folks, been on BBC Radio 4. So you know we have a quality guest this week. Would you please welcome to the show, Catherine Flick?
Hello, thanks for having me.
No problem. So before we get started on our topic proper, and I sound like every YouTuber, hey guys, before we get started. No, seriously, Catherine, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and maybe, so your background in tech, your tech pedigree, as it were?
Oh, wow. Tech pedigree. Okay, here we go. So way back in 1985, my father bought an IBM compatible PC. And
you've been listening to our retro episodes, haven't you?
It was not an IBM. It was an IBM compatible by NEC. And I remember it very well, because I wasn't allowed to play with it, but I was allowed to watch videos on the VCR that came for free with the PC because it was so expensive that they were actually giving away VCR machines. Isn't that incredible?
Wow.
And I watched Felix the Cat a lot. Anyway, that's my pedigree. Up until no, I actually learned how to do some. We had a little computer, I think, at school, like a BBC Micro B or something like that, and we learned a bit of BASIC. And my dad actually came down and taught kindergartners and year 1, year 2, how to program, little sprites moving up and down the screen and stuff like that. So I have, I'm from a techie family, I suppose you could say. Certainly my dad has been very encouraging of that. And then when I didn't know what I wanted to do after I finished high school in Australia, so that's the accent if anyone's wondering, I decided I'd go in to do a bioinformatics degree, which is biology and computer science, at the University of Sydney. And it was a very new course at the time because this was in 1999. Biology and computer science, sort of the idea of merging the two was only fairly in its infancy. And they were, really hyping it up as being, we'll have simulated, rats that we can experiment on instead of real rats. And that was kind of, I thought, that sounds kind of cool. I wanted to be a vet, you see, because I didn't get the marks to get into vet science. So I went and did this course, which basically was a biology degree and a computer science degree. And then they had this like mysterious project that theoretically brought the two together, but didn't really. It was actually not very well managed. Most of the people that started actually, and I was only on the second year of this program, and most of the people that started either went into either computer science or into biology. And I ended up doing computer science and history and philosophy of science, which is then how I started getting interested in the philosophy side of things, because my friend at the time was like, oh, you got to make up some credits somewhere And so I basically was like, oh, well, let's pick something easy and, we'll do it together. And so we picked out philosophy of science. We thought that'd be a nice, easy one after all the hard maths and chemistry and stuff we'd been doing. And it was easy, but I also fell in love with it. And that's how I got to doing a cross between computer science and history and philosophy of science. And then I went and did a PhD in computer ethics at Charles Sturt University. And all the while through that, I was actually working in industry. So I was a Unix sysadmin. I used to admin Solaris boxes, Solaris 2.6, and then it was like 5.2 when that came out, if I recall the numbers correctly. It's a long time ago now. I missed the dot-com boom by about this much, which is really annoying. But I worked for a very large recording company in Australia for a long time, doing their sysadmining and being a general kind of tech support person around the building, because we're in physical buildings doing this is when you had in-house tech support people for small companies, right? So that was a really good fun, actually. And that was when I I was like, well, actually, I don't really think this is for me, though, because while it was, I quite like doing the technical side of things. I thrive on positive reinforcement, and I found as when you're a sysadmin, it's all negative all the time, because if your server is not, if your server is up, nobody comes and says, "Hey, good job, you kept that server up for 300 days." No, it's when things go wrong. That's when you hear from people, and that didn't really suit me so well. So I went back to university and I did a PhD in computer ethics. And then, I guess from there, I did a postdoc in Belgium, where I looked at emerging governance of emerging technologies, ethical governance of emerging technologies for European projects. Then I moved to London and did some work on the ethics of natural language processing to identify adults pretending to be children in children's chat channels for purposes of grooming.
Oh, wow.
That was a really hardcore one. I was really, really tough, that one. It was a really interesting project, but it was eye-opening.
And emotionally draining, I'd imagine, as well.
Yeah, and then we had mandatory mandatory like counseling that we had to go to, because it was, there was the potential for us to, encounter problematic material and things like that, and distressing material. Thankfully, we never did. That was all the police were very careful that we never saw anything like that, which was good. But it was a really interesting project, but also one that's as a mum to a toddler and a baby, it's now going to haunt me for the rest of my life. That's why my children are not on social media, or on the internet at all. And then I moved from that to I got a lectureship position up at De Montfort University at the Centre for Computing and Social Responsibility. And that's when I started doing kind of, I guess, more pet projects, my own thing. And one of those things that I've been interested in doing. So in 2011, I ran actually a survey of Bitcoin users. And it was actually a really interesting survey. I was interested in the ethics of so I was fiddling around with it. I had a friend who worked for Tor at the time, and she and I went and we were just talking about it, and we both bought some Bitcoin at the time. I have since lost that Bitcoin about a year later. I didn't upgrade because the technology at the time was rubbish. You had to store your wallet on your PC, on your PC, but I had a Mac, right? And most of the wallet software had been written for Linux or for Windows, and there wasn't much for Mac available. So I basically was using a kind of command line ported version from the Linux version on my Mac. And when my Mac upgraded, it wiped the files. It wiped my wallet. Oh, no. So I had 2.5 Bitcoin in there. About £50 worth of Bitcoin I'd bought at the time. And I mean, 2.5 Bitcoin, right? It's probably worth a bit more than that now. But I clocked that to a lesson in life that sometimes things just pass you by and you just got to let them go. But anyway, it got me interested in Bitcoin and the people that used it and how people were using it. And I've been doing work on loosely. So I wrote a paper with her about the ethics of researching the dark net, which obviously that was what a lot of Bitcoin was being used for at the time. But also I ran a survey of Bitcoin users on, there used to be a forum called Bitcoin Talk, I think it was. I mean, they're all probably pretty much gone now, but also on Reddit, our Bitcoin on Reddit. And I asked questions about the ethics of Bitcoin. And I asked them, is it okay to use Bitcoin for in a bunch of different circumstances? And of course, it was always a flip coin type thing. So is it okay for it to be used for tax-free payments versus is it okay to be used for money laundering, right? And I mean, they're the same side of the different side of the same coin. So I wanted to see how the kind of the cognitive dissonance was working and how people kind of justified using Bitcoin. I gave a little talk about this at I believe it was one of the first Bitcoin conferences in London at the London Hackspace. And that video actually made it up onto the internet and got passed around and it got passed around by a bunch of the really libertarian wings. So all I was doing was reporting back on what people had said in my survey. But for whatever reason, this libertarian arm of the Bitcoin Enthusiast Society decided that it was me suggesting that this is how Bitcoin should be. And of course, people in the responses to my survey thought that it should be taxed and it should be regulated. It should be, brought into a wider banking system. I don't know, they thought it should be more regulated. And so, but this group of people vastly misunderstood what I was actually saying, and they thought that was what I thought, and they started sending a whole bunch of nasty emails and stuff. And I was just a little baby postdoc back then, and I was just like, yeah, I just don't have the mental energy for this, so I shelved that one and didn't talk about it anymore. I guess what 10, 12 years, almost 12 years later, it'd be interesting to do a return to that survey. But I don't know that I really want to kind of put my head, I'm putting my head above the parapet as much as I am at the moment, but that would be really putting my head above the parapet, I think, nowadays. So but that's my history sort of with Bitcoin, right? And then over the years, I lost the Bitcoin, obviously, at some point. I did a bunch of work on the dark net. I did a bunch of actually work on looking at the drug trade on the darknet. So I worked with some toxicologists in London looking at what do they call them? The spice, the synthetic cannabinoids.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Novel pharmaceutical substances, I think they call them. Anyway, they were wanting to try to identify them on the darknet, so they could potentially prepare hospitals for what might be the next wave of, problematic overdoses and things like that, because they changed the things up. They changed the recipes, I guess, up all the time. But it was just a really interesting study. But then, of course, they took almost all the drug sites went down, and it turned out that Bitcoin wasn't as anonymous as everyone thought. And, it kind of killed that a little bit. So there's not a lot of that. There's still a lot of that going on, but it's a lot more complicated than it used to be to actually buy stuff on the darknet using Bitcoin. And yeah, then I guess I got into, more recently, so I've done a whole bunch of other stuff. I do a lot of ethical governance. I do a lot of emerging technology stuff. I did a bunch of stuff on horizon scanning in technology used for older people. And I've done stuff on a lot of what I do at the moment is on video games, and the ethics and use of video games and how people play video games. But but I would still sort of have one foot in the crypto scene. So I got to become the kind of the BBC local radio go-to on whenever Bitcoin was spiking in its price. They'd get me on to explain what Bitcoin was, and my record was explaining Bitcoin in 15 seconds, but it took about an hour to actually record the 15 seconds. So I don't want to kind of do it off the top of my head. But
no, that's fine.
But yeah, so that's I guess that's sort of where that was last year. And then in January of this year, there was a lot of problematic stuff happening with people like the World Wildlife Fund were commissioning NFTs, and I kind of jumped up and yelled a lot about how actually it's really, really environmentally damaging, and that got a bunch of people quite interested in the topic. So I got in. I guess I got my seat at the crypto critics corner, so to speak, at that point where a lot of the other skeptics, I guess, on Twitter started to notice what I was doing, and so they started inviting me to kind of have conversations with them as well. So that was quite nice. And yeah, I guess I've just been, I guess other hats that I wear. I'm the incoming, after my maternity leave, the incoming vice chair of the Association of Computing Machinery's Committee on Professional Ethics. And that's basically the biggest professional organization for what we call computing professionals, which is a very broadly determined thing. You can, anyone who feels like they might qualify probably does. And it's also aimed at aspiring computing professionals. So we aim for this to be used as an aspirational document for students, educators, et cetera, as well. So it's not just supposed to be slapping people on the wrist if they happen to be an ACM member, although we do that as well. So it's a really interesting document. I helped to rewrite that in 2018 because it was really, really old and didn't really, kind of keep up to date with things. And then I've been wanting to really write a good analysis using that new code of ethics for a long time. And so then I sat down and wrote an NFT paper where I used that code of ethics to look at NFTs from a professional ethics perspective as a computing professional. So I think that's probably where, basically from, A to Z there, right?
I think that's a good, that gives us a good grounding. And it's a very, because a lot of the stuff we talk about on Crosswires is all about, the ethics of tech. We talked about, the episode that literally has gone out today as we record this today. The episode that's gone out today is all about messaging, secure and private messaging, the ethics of data harvesting. We might have, me and my guest Jeff might have slammed into Meta quite hard over some of their data collection policies for WhatsApp.
I kind of did that too. Yep. I've written a couple of papers about informed consent. So my PhD was on informed consent. And I wrote a very, apparently quite an impressive paper, according to the Facebook people, about Facebook and their emotional manipulation studies. So I wrote a paper about the ethics of that and the fact that it's not informed consent.
Yeah.
And then I recently wrote another paper about their responsible innovation unit, which has now been disbanded, about how basically their responsible innovation their guidance that they have on their VR, AR section of their website, which they used to have, is not actually responsible innovation. In fact, it's so vague, you might as well not have anything. And I wrote a fairly critical paper with a colleague of mine, Sally Applin, about that, which is a really interesting, and that got passed around, not just Facebook Meta, but because it was Facebook still. They just turned into Meta just after we published. But it's been passed around Apple and some of the other big VR people as well, because it's all about the augmented reality glasses that Facebook and Ray-Ban were putting together. Yeah, so we wrote a very critical thing about how they're not really applying their own responsible innovation procedures to their own products. So what hope do the rest of us have, right? Yeah. So I'm not a huge. I don't think people at Meta are very big fans of mine. Sorry.
That's fine because we're not big fans of Meta either. So the feeling's mutual.
And one thing that I have a big focus on is privacy. Like my degree I'm working on right now is in communications, and I am very much been studying the idea of like, what data do you collect on your customers? What do you do with that data? How do you collect it? And things like, I will never use Google Analytics because of the fact that even though it's free analytics for your site, you're adding to the overall Google ecosystem, and people can track you, and Google can track you across sites. And even the fact that like Google wanted to merge online and physical databases together, things like that. So I've had a big focus on that. And I mean, I remember the first time I walked into a mall and a digital signage board changed to a very obscure app in front of me that I was just looking at on my phone. I people will say that it might have been timing, but I know some of the data stuff and some of the ad agencies. So I'm very much focused on the ethics of stuff. It kind of reminds me of Jurassic Park. Just because we can, maybe we should have thought of, should we do it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the ethics of it is captured in that creepiness factor, the Ick Factor, I often call it when I'm teaching. And if you can unpack what it is about that ick factor, then actually that really gets you to the ethical issues at that hand, like the values that you hold yourself. If you can kind of unpack what is it about it that makes it feel ick, or it's the fact that I was just looking at this and it makes me feel like they're looking at me, or they're tracking what I'm doing. That's the icky bit. So, okay, what's icky about that? Well, it probably means they have a lot of information, or they're tracking, real time what I'm doing. So what's my value there? The values that I care about there are my privacy, and my, autonomy, right? And things like that. So you can really you can draw down from that gut feeling what values specifically it is that you really care about with regard to your technology. Yeah.
And it's really interesting, but because I'm still looking for a job at the moment, and I'm going to be honest, when I go and apply for a job, I have stopped the application cold based on how much data they're asking for. Application says, you're like, hang on a second, why do you need to know all of this just for me to go for a job application? I know there's some stuff you need to ask if I'm actually going to be employed, but why would I want to share that detail, that detail with you? That is, as you said, that ick factor. Oh, I'm not sure about that. And it's why I've, have started using, and we talked to Helen Horseman-Allen from Fastmail about this, but the concept of massed emails, being able to segregate I use a different masked email for every job application. Yes, it probably looks unprofessional, but I can say, well, no, I just, I've had to change my email address with the DWP, the benefits people, because they passed on my data, like almost everything about me, to a survey company.
Yeah, it's frustrating when you can track it back as well. So I used to do that with, I had like a dot, so my personal email, I can put a dot, and then I usually would put like the domain name of whatever it was. And when there were a bunch of LinkedIn, hacks, quite a while ago, and I knew it was LinkedIn that had leaked my information to, like, it was like a food company or something, like a Just Eat or whatever, that sort of thing, that sort of company, and I was getting emails from them advertising their food delivery service, but it was to my LinkedIn thing, and I was like, that's not right. And so I wrote to LinkedIn and said, look, has something happened? Have you been hacked? And they're like, no, we're fine. I'm like, but I'm getting these emails anyway. It wasn't until I think 5 years later that they finally acknowledged that they'd been hacked back at the time when I actually wrote to them and said,
wow,
what's going on? And since then I've been like, I go to PAX East quite frequently in Boston, and LinkedIn have an office on the walkway from where my hotel usually is and the conference center. And every time I walk past, I shake my fist at them and I say, you leaked my email. So I'm a little bit petty like that. Yeah, damn you, LinkedIn.
And that is actually one reason why, I did the same as James. I'm putting in everything in the masked email. And James was even like, why are you doing all this? I'm like, I just want to protect my email. I want to make sure that, like, I know who's doing what. Because I have so many emails coming in from so many different places that I'm like, how did you get this email? I remember when I bought batteries on Amazon. All of a sudden, I'm getting ads on Facebook for batteries, and I'm just like, I know that's because of the ad agencies and cookies and stuff like that, but there's no control.
It's creepy.
It is.
I work for a grocery store, and I will get ads for this grocery store because of my data in the store. I'm working to use like VPN stuff like that, but my own employer is selling my data because I'm an active shopper at my store.
No, it's rubbish. But the blockchain could change all of that. The blockchain could change all of that, right?
Really?
Because you'd be able to own your data and you'd be able to sell it to the people that you want to sell it to, theoretically, right? So if you owned your own data and then on the something blockchain something sell it through microtransactions, etc., right? That's how it works.
Sorry, I've just got an image.
So that's my transition. That's my transition.
No, it's a great that's an even better transition than a Linus Tech Tips video. There we go. That's saying something. So. Blockchain. Oh, by the way, all I had a picture of it is when you said something blockchain. I just thought of the Family Guy Star Wars with Palpatine. Yeah. Something dark side. Something.
Yep.
Blockchain.
That's pretty about right.
What? So, we could say blockchain is the Sith. Yeah. So I guess the first question for maybe, and certainly, like I will admit, I know very little about blockchain, about cryptocurrency and NFT. I know enough to know that, to go back to what you said, there's an ick factor. There's something that doesn't sit quite right with me about it. But let's start at blockchain, because I think we said pre-show, blockchain itself isn't necessary. Well, I said, let me rephrase that.
You said it.
I asked, is blockchain itself a bad thing? So before we go into the ethics of blockchain, what give us a little bit of a rundown of what blockchain is that maybe even I can understand?
Also, I mean, blockchain itself at the very base level of the technology is actually it's a really old technology. It's been around for, I don't know, like 50 years or something like that. It's just that it's not been hyped up until recently. But the basic idea of it is that it's a distributed, publicly accessible, shared ledger of transactions, essentially. So it's like having an accounting ledger, and it's distributed amongst a bunch of people, right? Or computers, really, when it comes down to it. It's distributed between these computers, and there's the incentive for them to maintain this distribution network, and also to verify the things that are added to the ledger. So the transactions that are added to the ledger, back in the old days, it was more a kind of a shared understanding that that's the sort of thing that you would have to do in order to participate, right? A little bit like peer-to-peer, file sharing or whatever. You've got to upload in order to download, right? You've got to be participating in the network. It's the old, free open source software kind of community kind of feel to it, right? You've got to participate in order to also benefit. But what the blockchain has become increasingly used for is as, not just what's a means to an end, but also as the end itself, in that the incentive is now this cryptocurrency, and the incentive to maintain the cryptocurrency is cryptocurrency itself. So it becomes both the driving force and the driver of the end of what the driving force is, right? So it's no longer back in the olden days, it wasn't really used for anything significant. I think probably the best kind of comparison is that there are two different types of blockchain at the moment. There's what's called public blockchain, which is all the cryptocurrencies, all the NFTs, all the stuff that you hear about. There's also what's called it's also called permissionless blockchain. So you don't need permission from any kind of central group of people to actually participate in this. There's also this thing called permission blockchain, where basically you have to, it's a private network, and someone has to let you in, right? And then, so that side of it, that's actually not so bad, because then you go back to this old style participate in order to benefit kind of situation where, I can certainly see instances where that might be helpful, right? And there have been some discussions about things like using companies that are in logistics, using it to keep track of items that are being transferred between different companies, for example, where they're all competing, but they're cooperating, right? So you've got that kind of situation. So that makes sense for having a public.
So something like a better way of doing parcel tracking without having to go to every single provider's website. You could just have a global tracking number.
The thing is, it would be very much behind the scenes, though. It wouldn't actually be publicly accessible at all. And that's the difference, is that it's not publicly accessible. It's very much part of the infrastructure within those companies, right? So actually at the moment, if you take many tracking numbers, not all of them, but if you take, if you look at, say, for example, the post office as opposed to, say, DHL or any of the other, private companies, if I take an Australian post office tracking number and I put it into the Royal Mail postal tracking, they'll be able to work it out, right? And so they sort of do that already. They're just, the private ones are less good at that. Anyway, so that's a scenario in which maybe blockchain is not so bad. The thing is for those sorts of situations is that it's quite costly in terms of infrastructure, and actually to a large degree, just essentially a shared database would probably be a much more efficient, and you can get shared auditable databases. They've been around for a long time as well. And they're also, they're auditable, like a public blockchain is, theoretically. So yeah, so there is existing technology. You don't need to implement blockchain in order to have this feature, basically is what I'm saying, right? So, but that's one potential use you could have for it, but it's not not an exclusive use case, right? So then we get to the public blockchain stuff, which is the cryptos and all of that. And what you're basically doing is seeing people transfer tokens between themselves, and, buying, selling, trading, whatever. And that those are what's getting registered on the ledger. So for example, for Bitcoin, it's very simple. It's just, I have 5 Bitcoin. I want to give you 3 Bitcoin. I send you that to your address. It gets put onto the ledger. That transaction gets verified. And you know that you can trust that you have that 3 Bitcoin sitting in your wallet by the time I say it should be done or whatever, right? And that's the kind of the basics of it. It gets a little bit more complicated when you get into things like NFTs and things like all these DAOs and, which are, I can't remember what this stands for now. I'm on maternity leave, so my brain sort of, most of it works, and then things like acronyms, I just can't remember. But, anyway, I think like distributed autonomous organizations or something like that. But basically they're like cooperatives, but they're on the blockchain. So you can buy tokens that give you voting rights, that help you manage, decide what's going to happen on that blockchain and how, what the next feature might be or whatever. And the idea is that kind of distributes and makes democratic, various, aspects of the project that you happen to be buying into, right? And there's a lot of people think they've found the magic use case for blockchain, but honestly, the only real use case there is for blockchain is through Bitcoin, and its use as a ransomware payment system, and to potentially buy drugs and other illegal things on the darknet. And that's pretty much the only Bitcoin / cryptocurrency only use case that you can get, as far as I'm concerned. And as you probably might know, those are not the most ethical uses of technology in the world. No. So I would not say that there is any actual ethical use case for cryptocurrency or Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or blockchain, because basically all of it resides on this requirement for it to have an underlying cryptocurrency that builds in the incentives for people to maintain the blockchain, right? So the fact that cryptocurrency can then be like, if people were just getting paid to verify transactions, that would be fine. But the problem is that cryptocurrency can also be used as a speculative mechanism. And when you mix the two, that's when you get, people who like do things like pump and dump schemes, when people, basically outright, commit fraud. And the fact is that blockchain-based cryptocurrencies are essentially a greater fool situation. In order for someone to be able to get their cash out of a cryptocurrency, somebody else has to be paying cash in, and that right. That's the only way you can get it back out again. So I mean, that someone might be you, it might be like a hedge fund, it might be, but really ultimately it comes back down to the people who come in late to the game are the ones who tend to be the most vulnerable, and the ones who tend to be left holding the bag, as they say. So often called the bag holders, because they're the ones who are left with an diminishing value product, essentially, like, so a token, like, so, for example, people who bought Bitcoin back in November of last year, thinking, it's going to go up and it's going to keep going and keep going and keep going because that's how it's been going. They were often left holding the bag in July this year when it crashed. So that's, they will have lost a lot of money. And the big issue for crypto type currencies is that there's a lot of focus, particularly in the media, on those who make it big. Not so much on those who lose a lot, because the people who tend to lose a lot of money don't like to talk about it, because a lot of them have done things like take out loans or remortgage their house or use money that their family doesn't know about, or like, they don't know that they've spent the money on buying crypto, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of vulnerable people who have lost a lot. But the focus has tended to be on the people who've made a lot of money. And that's been a real problem up until fairly recently, I would say. I think the latest crash has shown the issues with, there being a lot of people on the receiving end of having, being the bag holders for things like FTX, for example, and some of the other big exchanges, for example. So, yeah. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, from my point of view. Jay, I think you were going to ask something.
Absolutely, it does help a lot. And one podcast I want to recommend. It's a type of these cryptocurrencies, the Missing Crypto Queen. It's an Catherine, I don't know if you've heard of that one. It is an amazing podcast, and it's just it shows like that one opened my eyes to a lot of things.
Yes. That one was pure fraud, though. That wasn't even a cryptocurrency. It was a crypto-like. There wasn't even a blockchain involved. It was just someone with a database and they manipulated the hell out of it. It was really bad. It was just straight up fraud. That was, yeah.
The organization could edit the database and add all this stuff. And the thing that came to mind is I've heard a lot of reports about the supposed transparency of the wallet, but then somebody getting their wallet hacked, and all of a sudden, within seconds, the money is changed hands so many times that the FBI or whoever's trying to find the stuff cannot find the information again. And there's so many ways to move things around, and even a type of transaction that I don't want to mention on this podcast that is used a lot for Bitcoin and what I've read about that stuff. And it breaks my heart how as much as some people may have some issues with the banking systems, how at least with there's a little bit more control. There's a little bit more audit trail. Whereas here, if somebody gets your money, it's gone. At least from what I've read. Is that pretty true?
No, that's 100%. Yep. And in fact, there were some cryptocurrency exchanges that got into a lot of trouble because they were saying that they were FDIC approved, which in America means that there's a certain guarantee that you'll get your deposits back. A bit like in the UK, we have deposit guarantees. I can't remember what it's called.
Financial Services Compensation Scheme, I think.
That's the one. Thank you. Yep.
That's it. No, sorry, I used to work in banking, so I know it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so basically, if you put up to a certain amount of money into a UK bank, if the bank goes under, you'll be able to get, I think it's 85 grand, I think you can put into a bank account, and you'll be able to get that money back. I think it goes back to the government essentially. So taxpayers step in, hooray, thanks taxpayers. But with these cryptocurrency exchanges, that there's nothing like that. And certainly there was at least one of the ones in America got into trouble for saying that they had that sort of protection when they didn't. The problem is, of course, is that you've got to remember that a lot of these exchanges are kind of a complex beast in crypto, right? Because the idea, you think of an exchange, you think, oh, I take my cash and I change it into Bitcoin, or I change it into Ethereum, or whatever the coin is that I want to change it to, and then something happens. I sit on it. Right. I take back in the beginning when I was talked about how I had my Bitcoin on my computer, right, in a wallet, and it got wiped. These days, a lot of the software that's associated with crypto actually tends to store your Bitcoin or whatever not on your computer because that might happen, right? So instead it stores it in the cloud. But the cloud generally is one of these exchanges, and these exchanges will often then hold on to people's money, essentially, and their cryptocurrency. And then what they'll often do is they go off and they actually gamble with it. And so they'll say to you, oh, you've got 10 Bitcoin in your wallet online, but you don't really have 10 Bitcoin because they've actually given that Bitcoin to a hedge fund to go and do silly things with it, which is what happened with the FTX. So that's how that crashed, is because then people started coming back. This started leaking out that there might be some silly things going on, and people started coming and trying to claw back their cash, right? Or change it into Bitcoin, or change it, or basically try to get that money back out. And they had a bank run essentially, and they didn't have the liquidity, they didn't have the customer deposits stored. They didn't have that to give back, so they failed. Basically, that's how it crashed and burned a lot of people. So a lot of people's, like the purists will say, oh, well, that's their fault. They should have downloaded it onto a secure computer and, I don't know, put it on a USB stick and dug a hole and stuck it in their garden or whatever, whatever it is but that's just not accessible to most people. And also a lot of these exchanges are advertising themselves as being safe places to keep your money. Like they look like banks. They have apps like banks. They, behave. They say all the same sorts of things that banks sort of say, except there's a whole bunch of little tiny print at the bottom that says, oh, these aren't, guaranteed, blah, 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 etc. Right. And that's actually, I think, is also really irresponsible.
No, because I'm reminded of like one of them, Mount Gox was one that I had remembered reading about years ago.
Those were the first ones. Yeah.
And there is no, I know in this country, there's been talk about starting to regulate cryptocurrency. But at the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, there's very little government regulation on cryptocurrency around the world. I can't think, again, this is where I'm going to show my ignorance, I can't think of a single country that is regulating.
So the IRS is coming for Americans to pay tax on some of their crypto stuff now, but it really depends on who you are and how much the IRS is already looking at you. They're seizing. So if there's fraud cases, for example, they are seizing cryptocurrency. And I think also HMRC has been looking very much at the it's coming through tax because they don't want to lose out on the tax, right?
So it's not about necessarily the morality of it. It's the fact, hey, we want tax money.
God, no. You think the government cares about morality of this stuff? No, they want the money. They're very cross about the fact that people are using this instead of going through the Bank of England or, whatever the American the Fed, right? That's what it is there. The federal bank. And, they're very cross about that. And this is why you get like politicians say, oh, maybe we should do our own cryptocurrency through the Bank of England, the Britcoin. I remember going on the radio a few times to talk about Britcoin. And that was, it's just ridiculous. They can't, the thing is we already have like Britcoin. It's contactless payments, right? That's what we have. And that's, one of my biggest arguments against all this is that there is already technology that does all the stuff that they promise, they say they want to do. And it's, better for the environment. It's, less likely to be used as fraudulently. It's more regulatory compliancy. You can, and it's already existing and well tested. It's not a bunch of bros from Silicon Valley who think they can make a lot of money off a lot of other people, right? And yeah, this is the problem. The problem really is that a lot of this stuff is so technologically driven that they don't really stop to sort of think, okay, well, what is the actual problem that we're solving here, right? They just think, oh, we've got this really cool technology. Let's go for it. Let's make it. We'll see what happens as we go. We'll see what maybe people will innovate, and they call this innovation, right? But really, it's a solution looking for a problem. And the fact that it's been around since, before 2011. I did my first Bitcoin study really in 2011, but Ethereum came out not too long after that. And it's been around for years now, and still the only real use cases that we've got are essentially illegal ones. So aiding and abetting. So it's not, it's still, and there's a lot of people who are like, oh, but it's still in its infancy. We're still working out what we can do with it. And it's like, no, there's a lot of, they call it hopium, that is, they hope that it's going to be good for something, and that drives a lot of it. But really, what's behind it is a lot of smoke and mirrors, unfortunately.
I've got a question. How does it compare to things like V-Bucks or Nintendo eShop coins, things where like you buy from a company? Am I right that the biggest difference is Bitcoin is that public ledger versus you're buying from a private company's ledger of, so many coins, or like even gift cards?
Yes, no, you're right. Absolutely right. So if I buy some, I don't know, and Nintendo e-coins or whatever, right? There's only a certain number of places I could use them, like the shop, Nintendo shop. And maybe I could buy, like an amiibo or something with it, like if you want a physical thing, right? But with this, theoretically, it is like, and that, what really is underlying that is a centralized database that's centralized, right? So Nintendo runs, owns, maintains, updates, etc., this database, right? And they own that. Whereas with the Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, it's shared amongst a pool of a group of a whole bunch of people, right? And they're often called miners, especially for the proof of work one. So Bitcoin, for example, is miners. If the proof of stake type blockchains, which this is where it gets the environment stuff starts to come in here, right? So there's proof of work and proof of stake. Proof of work is basically the one that's dreadful for the environment because it is an increasingly complicated set of mathematical puzzles that people have to solve in order to validate transactions on the database, essentially on the ledger. That's Bitcoin, and it used to be Ethereum. So Ethereum has just completed their merge, what they called, which was a transition from proof of work to proof of stake. Now, proof of stake is basically people who have the most money win, basically. So you stake, if you want to become part of this process by which you earn Ethereum in order to, as your incentive to help maintain the ledger, you basically stake Ethereum. So you put up a stake saying, look, I'm going to put up this amount, and if this validation, if this thing fails, then I lose my money, basically. That's how it works, right? And then you get a little bit of extra back if it's successful. And really what that changes is it changes the people who are involved in the low level technology of it in terms of the maintenance, et cetera, et cetera. It changes that from a pool of people that have a lot of money to buy a lot of hardware and can move shipping containers around to the cheapest energy sources in the US, right? Mostly these days because China shut it all down. But they're literally carting shipping containers full of rigs to deepest, darkest Texas where there might be a methane flare or something like that. It's ridiculous. It's changed it from that group of people who have a lot of money to do that to just a whole bunch of people who have a lot of money who can put up lots of potential stakes, right? So it's a bit like, it's a bit like buying a lottery ticket. The more lottery tickets you buy, the more likely you are to win, right? Theoretically. And so the more Ethereum you stake, or the more cryptocurrency you stake, the more likely you are to be chosen to do the verification for a transaction, and then you get the payment. So it's changed it. It's just changed it slightly, but it's changed it from very, very environmentally problematic to just very rich people. But then there's a whole bunch of other problems that come with proof of stake in that it's not as good a system as proof of work, because there's a lot of stuff that you can do with like pools, and you can get all your, cartels, essentially. You can form a cartel and start to manipulate the blockchain. And it just gets really, really, really complicated from a technological perspective. But the difference between that and the Nintendo thing is that Nintendo owns, maintains everything, the database. Here we have the people who are essentially buying into the system in order to maintain, and get rewarded for that. And it's actually quite, really, really good rewards. They're the ones who essentially run it. And this becomes kind of more important when you get into some of these kind of cooperatives where people are trying to kind of steer a project in a particular direction, because the more money you have to buy the votes in your DAO, the more impact you're going to have on the direction of that DAO. And so they sort of say things like, oh, well, it's going to be democratic and everyone can get a vote, and you got to, you get the amount, out that you put in, sort of thing. But then you get DAOs that there was one DAO that basically kicked the original owner out of the DAO, and then and essentially performed a coup, and stuff like that happened. There was another one where they used the ability to buy votes essentially to steal all the money that was sitting in a DAO, because they banded together with some other people and then they basically just shared the money out like like a heist. So there's a whole bunch of interesting sort of social stuff that gets plastered on top of this, right? And this is the thing with technology, is that, the technology underlying it is fairly simple, right? You have, as far as technology goes, it's actually not too complicated. But what they don't account for is that social layer. And the social layer is the really complicated one that people just can't really predict. And how people are going to respond to this, how they're going to interact with it, how it's going to affect their lives, and this is where a lot of, I think, the kind of the technologists get quite blinkered by the technology, and they really don't try to anticipate any of the issues that might happen when it hits society. And then it's only when the technological rubber hits the societal road that you get the problems, right? Because suddenly you've got this technology that's actually quite powerful, if simple. It's quite powerful, and the wrong people use it in the wrong way, or, and the people who develop it never think about this, or they try not to think about it. They don't want to think about it. They just want to think about their utopian vision of what the technology might bring. And this is really, this is not a problem unique to blockchain at all, but it's certainly a very, a loud example of where it can go horribly wrong, I think.
We talk about the environmental impact. These mining rigs, they require, as well as, correct me if I'm wrong here, as well as mathematical calculations become more and more complex, that requires faster and faster. Now, typically, this is all done on GPUs, on graphics cards, because a graphics card actually is better for mathematical calculation than your traditional CPU. And so you see, and I think a really good example of societal impact where cryptocurrency has impacted the wider society is when we had the stupidity of not being able to get graphics cards, or graphics cards being designed exclusively and for mining. And up until maybe earlier this year, you were talking ridiculous money for even a half decent GPU. And that then impacted people who wanted to play games. They weren't interested in crypto. They just wanted to play the latest Cyberpunk 2077. We're on half decent settings. And then, of course, let's just not brush over this. There's the whole environmental impact. Energy. We're meant to be looking after this planet. Yes. And all these crypto rigs, I'm really sorry, folks, we're not doing that. They are just sucking up energy for no real societal benefit.
Well, so their argument, right? So that they have an argument for everything. Their argument is that, yes, it's environmentally damaging, but the good that it's bringing to society by freeing us of the shackles of regulated, banking institutions is worth that damage, right? And this is the real, like the hard purists, right? And they sort of, it really is. And there are quite a surprising number of them. But they're very much, they feel that is the most pressing issue, really, is that we're not free enough, in our, and then, because if we were all free of the shackles of the institutions, then we could put all this money into saving the environment, and it'll be a lot more money than that it would take to actually do the mining of the cryptocurrency, blah, blah, blah. Oh, also, we've got these new products coming out called like Lightning and stuff like that, which will make those transactions quicker and easier. And also, we're banking the unbanked is the other one, right? So this is where we're giving the freedom of capitalism to the people who don't normally have bank accounts in developing countries, and without even thinking, well, have you even asked them if they want this? Actually, there's also a lot of systems in these. Once again, the technology already exists as well, because places like Kenya have been using M-Pesa, which is a mobile phone based, banking system, which basically trades in, minutes, like mobile phone minutes, which is, basically a currency there, right? And and you can trade in minutes in a lot of places instead of cash or using electronic electronic payments and things like that, because that's actually a lot more convenient for people. And so I mean, these systems already exist. Yes, they're centralized, and yes, but that means then they're also regulated. They're more safe for the people who are using them. There's more trust in the banking system because of that, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, I mean, it's really frustrating to see a lot of these arguments, because they a few of them will put them out, and then everyone just takes them as given without even really investigating whether there's actually anything, like whether even people want that. And whether, it's actually feasible to do it. Because if you think about it, if they're having if people, people who don't have bank accounts are probably the sort of people that don't have high availability internet connections. And what happens when those go down? Like, how do you still pay with your Bitcoin when you have, you're running off a backup generator because there's no, power? Like, I mean, there's a whole bunch of problems just with the technological side of it, let alone the moral, aspects of the whole incentive system that like the speculative incentive system that drives the whole economy, right? So it's really problematic from multiple levels.
The one aspect that I do think on the underlying technology I do like is, but we already had it before, is the peer-to-peer files, BitTorrent, stuff like that, where you're, say like Blizzard. When I don't know, I think Blizzard now moved to a centralized CDN, but when Blizzard was first starting out, they would use a lot of the peer-to-peer on that to serve patches. Because whenever a patch for World of Warcraft came out, when I was a young 14-year-old, I would go on Patch Tuesday, instead of having this overloaded server, I would download the patch while I'm at school. I would just start the downloader, and while I'm there, other people would be getting the patch as well. And stuff like that, I saw as a good thing. But I do like that aspect of the technology, but that was less money focused. That was more just trying to solve a capacity bandwidth issue that we kind of have solved a little bit now with the cloud.
The whole concept of CDNs have solved a lot of that issue, because back then it would have been just one Blizzard server, maybe 2 or 3, but now that gets handed over to companies like Akamai or Cloudflare. But sorry, Jay, go on, ask your question.
Oh no, and so how much of that technology is blockchain based off of, or is that more of the concept that it's based off of?
No, this is the thing, right? Like, the whole blockchain thing is so separate. And this is what they want to say, is they want to say, oh, Web3 is going to be just the decentralized web and all this sort of stuff, right? And it's all going to be based on blockchain. And I mean, we were joking around before about how you could, sell your private information on blockchain. But that's actually one of the things they want to be able to do, right? Is be able to have microtransactions for everything. So theoretically, it's all decentralized. And I don't know, like, the problem is it's such vaporware. You can't even really start to describe how it actually works, because there's nothing there yet. It's all just pie in the sky stuff, right? But we've had decentralized stuff for decades now. I mean, I'm an old school Linux nerd. I mean, I ran my own mail server back in I think I got my first domain name in 2000, and I ran my own mail server, and I had to stop doing that recently, because basically, I run it off a virtual private server, right? And, but because nowadays the big email companies won't let you basically run your own mail server anymore, because they're just so worried about spam that anything that looks like it doesn't come from one of the other big email companies, they automatically, at least they sort of soft block you, if not fully block you. And so it's really frustrating. So I had to I've moved to Fastmail, would you believe? So there you go, as an advertisement for your previous. Nice. I have a lot of respect for Fastmail. So, it was good to see that you had her on. Actually, I enjoyed that interview very much. That's the one I had to listen to, of course. Yeah. So I moved to Fastmail because I couldn't run my own server anymore, because it kept on getting, spam blocked by Hotmail and Gmail. But that was the original decentralized web. The idea was that if you had a domain name, you ran your own mail server, you ran your own web server, you ran your own, you could run an IRC server, you could run pretty much you could run all of this stuff, on your own server. And that was it was decentralized. No, everyone wasn't on Google. Everyone wasn't on, Twitter or Facebook, you run your own stuff. And so it really angers me actually quite a lot. I get very cross about this, the fact that they're sort of trying to hijack that really, quite old original idea of what the decentralized web was and just put this horrible junk into it that just, it doesn't make sense. It serves only to improve the lives of those who've already bought into it. And it's really just, it's a way for a bunch of venture capital companies to make a whole bunch of money off the backs of people that are probably vulnerable and don't have the money to lose. And it makes me really cross. So yes, so
I like the anger.
They take all the talking points of that. They take all the lovely, peer-to-peerness, they take all of that and they apply it to their garbage. And really what we should be looking at, and this is why I love the fact that since when Twitter as Twitter is exploding, people are moving back to properly decentralized stuff.
Yeah,
Mastodon, right? And I'm on Mastodon. I would be running my own server if I wasn't a moderator on a friend's server, which I just don't want to have to deal with. I've been a sysadmin for too long, and I don't want to deal with the drama. Basically,
correct me if I'm wrong, and we can cut this out. Are you moderator on mastodon.me.uk?
Yes, I am. .me.uk. Yep. I'm a moderator there.
So just for complete transparency, James Smith, who was on our Into a Fediverse episode, actually introduced me to Catherine to get Catherine on the show to talk about this stuff. And that's what me and James were talking about, old IRC servers, old email servers, web servers. Look, the Crosswire's website, we're not using WordPress as a service. We have our own DigitalOcean droplet, which is what effectively is still a VPS at the end of the day. It's still a web server. It's just
but you only have to deal with, you don't have to deal with all the other garbage of it.
No.
Yeah.
But, that's what decentralized should be looking like. Now, you talked about, and maybe I think this might be our heading into the wrap up, but I did want to talk about NFTs because one of the things I know you talk about is the ethics of video games. I am so sick of video games companies, particularly maybe some of the old ones who are trying to bring back things, turning to NFTs. Now, NFT, correct me if I'm wrong, non-fungible token.
Right.
Again, what's the idea here? That you can prove that you own a piece of something, maybe like some artwork or some special character card via the blockchain? Yeah.
So basically, I'll just do the quick explanation. So, like we were talking about the ledgers on the blockchain, really all what an NFT is so with Bitcoin or one of the other cryptocurrencies, all it's saying is when you write the entry on the blockchain, all it says was money this amount sent from this wallet to that wallet. But with an NFT, you can actually with the NFT layer, essentially, you can write a little bit more. And that little bit more can be something like a URL or, you could even potentially upload files and things to that little bit more, but they don't do it because it's very slow and it costs it used to cost a lot of gas, and it still probably does cost a lot of gas to do it on which is the processing fee, I guess you could call it, but it used to be essentially the environmental impact waiver that Ethereum had. And this is even before we get to it also would, the more gas you pay, the sooner you get pushed up the queue to get your transaction approved, essentially. So there's a whole bunch of other stupid stuff behind that. Because they just don't have enough bandwidth for all these transactions. It's garbage. Anyway, this technology sucks. It's really bad. It doesn't even do what they want it to do out of the tin. It's terrible.
So hang on, are we saying that NFTs and the blockchain is basically like a printer? It doesn't do what it's meant to do.
The blockchain doesn't act. They have to do so much stuff to the blockchain just to make it reach the number of transactions that they want it to have. Anyway, it's really slow. It's like trying to print, a 500-page document on a dot matrix printer. And and then they think, oh, well, maybe we'll hook 2 dot matrix printers up and we'll get them to go together, and they'll only be half as slow. That's pretty much what they're doing. But anyway, So NFTs, right? So you can write that a little bit more. And what the original NFT was supposed to do was essentially show ownership of something. Like it's supposed to be like a digital certificate that says this wallet owns the thing that is written, whatever it is in that thing, right? And actually Anil Dash, who was one of the first, basically like coded this stuff up with a I think it was like a musician friend of his, or some sort of artist friend, in like 2 seconds sort of thing. Like and there was a proof of concept where they just basically plonked a URL in there and said, okay, well, this is the idea is that whoever has this certificate will own whatever's at that URL. But of course, we all know that URLs fail and whatever. And they weren't expecting it to be ever used like that. But that's actually how it ended up being used, was that a whole bunch of people just essentially tacked URLs in there. I mean, we've already seen them kind of go astray and break down already. So, and the problem is because the blockchain is immutable, which means it can't be modified, you can't actually change the URL. Once you've registered the NFT, you can't actually change what's inside that NFT. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, NFTs can also have code in them. And so this is actually how the DAOs and stuff work that I was talking about, the voting and all that. That's actually how this works. But they can actually, so they're called smart contracts. And what it is essentially code. And it basically puts into practice their code is law kind of philosophy, because once you write that code, you can't change it. So if you have a bug in your code, you can't change it. And there's been some video games that have actually been like some of these blockchain-based video games. They've had to withdraw all of their NFTs and redo them all because of the fact that they couldn't actually there was a bug in the code that meant that it didn't work properly or something like that. So yeah, it's really bad. So, the video game side of things, you'll be pleased to know that certainly I've been working with quite a few big video game companies on their NFT, on their NFT approaches. And I've had a lot of mostly backdoor kind of conversations with people that have then made their way into the halls of power, so to speak. Mostly they just didn't know what they were. So they were mostly just investigating them. And now they know they're rubbish, and most of them are not going to touch them with the 10-foot pole. So, I mean, you saw Ubisoft's, venture, for example, in the cloud, it was Cloud Recon or whatever it was, Ghost Recon.
Oh, yeah.
I don't play those games. Yeah, Ghost Recon. Yep. Anyway, they, it failed miserably. And certainly some of the other big companies that I've been having conversations with are not interested. Like the thing is they have to say they're interested because they don't want to miss out on the hype. And if there's money being thrown at them to investigate, they'll totally investigate, right? So, I mean, and that's fair enough, right? I mean, if you don't know about a thing, go find out about a thing. If you get money to find out about a thing, even better, right? So, yeah, but I can tell you that they're pretty much not at all interested. So what that leaves you with is a whole bunch of these little startups who are doing essentially these like play to win type games, or they're doing things like play to help the environment, which is just makes me very upset. But it's basically play to exploit other people, because a lot of these play to win games essentially take advantage of the fact that a certain amount of cryptocurrency is worth a lot more in other countries than it is in, say, the US. And so they essentially set up systems by which they get a whole army of people who live in less developed countries to essentially do the work for them. So it's not play to win, it's work to pay.
Right.
And so this is what happened with Axie Infinity. So there were a lot of, before Axie Infinity kind of completely just died. Well, I mean, they had a whole lot of problems with the balancing the game because of the fact that they basically had a whole lot of people who essentially hired a whole bunch of players from the Philippines in particular. I mean, there are other countries too, but the Philippines had a huge number of players that signed up to make a lot of money, right? And they made a lot of money, but they had to buy in. You have to buy in to play, or used to have to buy in to play Axie Infinity. So what they would do is they'd take a loan out from one of these big players, and then they'd start playing, they'd pay their loan back, and then they would also then become, go on to make money themselves, theoretically. That's how theoretically it was supposed to be. So it was like indentured labor, basically. anyway, the problem is that Axie Infinity had a lot of trouble with their game economy and they couldn't balance it very well. So there was a lot of the stuff that these people were farming for these big players that was theoretically worth money. Axie Infinity nerfed it. And so suddenly it wasn't worth any money anymore. And so these people weren't getting the pay they were thinking they were going to get. So they just quit. And so it left a whole bunch of people, without any of their indentured servants, theoretically. So it was really problematic. And the biggest issue with these sorts of video games is it's not so much about the actual technology. It comes back to the same things that all online games struggle with, which is balance and economy, right? And how do you deal with things where you can trade with real money for something. So remember the Diablo 3 auction house debacle? Yeah. So, I mean, they learned that many years ago that it's a really bad idea to have functional items, being able to buy things, functional items for money, for real money. And it's best just to leave it to, skins and cosmetics and whatever, which is what they have now. And I think a lot of these other companies are starting to realize that actually, these are really just once again used as speculative investment tools, and they're not actually people enjoying playing a game. They're people working to make money. And that's a very different game experience. It's not, and many people would say that's not a game anymore. That's actually just work. So that's now, I think, where games are on that. I mean, there might be a couple of big games that still haven't, big companies that haven't quite worked themselves out yet. But I think most of the big ones I've talked to seem to, hopefully, fingers crossed, have sorted themselves out on which side they're going to come down on that. Yeah.
Like Second Life, I know, was one of the ones, not an NFT, but was one of the first game type chat worlds. Well, no, second, because Active Worlds, I was a chat member of Active Worlds, and it was a 3D chat program where you could buy models from artists. So you were paying artists real money for items you could then upload to your...
Yeah, which is great. Fantastic. I think that's great. But as soon as those things become functional in a way that means you win a game better than somebody that doesn't have that, that's where you have the problems. Yeah.
It's one reason why I love Apple Arcade is I know at least when I download a game, like I downloaded SpongeBob Solitaire Pants, it's a lot of fun. There's no microtransaction that I can just play. And
well, you introduced me to a game recently, There Is No Game, and a whole chapter of that is where the game goes free to play. In order to progress, you have to literally buy items, not as, give me an advantage, actually to progress the story. I don't have a problem with things like DLC when it's done responsibly. Like when DLC becomes additive, not essential. So I think we talked about, Jay, Star Wars, Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker saga, where you actually have to pay for the characters. You can't just unlock them.
Yeah.
And the problem there for me fundamentally comes down to what's the target audience. I genuinely remember this. Like, this is one of the most standout moments of my time in banking when I was working. I'd been trained up. I originally started out working in savings, trained up to work on bank accounts. I won't name which bank it was, but it was quite a big bank here in the UK. And a mother had called up because her child, I can't remember the age, maybe about 8 or 9, she'd linked her card to his Xbox Live account, as you do. Yeah,
Oop.
Catherine's face already, you can see. Yeah, and he'd spent something like £800 on Xbox Live points because he didn't understand that
it's
equals
real money.
But the game saying, hey, you can get all these lovely things by using these points or by paying them. And of course, it's that you are, again, going back to a vulnerability. It's one of my biggest problems with tech is taking advantage of the vulnerable. That, you talked about the, computer, the ACM code of practice. I think if we had better codes of practice I want to be very careful how I say this, for certain computer repair shops who have about zero ethics when it comes to repairing people's tech. Because the point is, this poor woman, single mother from what I remember, there was nothing the bank was going to do for her. Why would we? Wasn't our problem.
Yeah. She got the service she paid for. Yeah. I mean, this is a big issue. Yeah. I mean, so I'm actually one of the projects that I'm working on at the moment with the colleagues at York is we are working with a large bank, which I won't talk about. And we are looking at expenditure on video games, in particular, as part of their financial. They're looking at ways to understand financial well-being, and this is one of the things is where we're actually looking at problematic video game expenditure to look at people who are perhaps being like a lot of it's looking at the fake casino games, like those casino games that aren't really casino games,
yes,
that are like casino-like games, and people still spend loads of money on these games, but they don't get anything out of it. Like they don't even get a win because they can't actually trade, like the games can't actually give them money back. It's crazy. So, but they're still addicted to them essentially. So we're looking at that in conjunction with, the NHS's, so the NHS has also got a problematic, gaming, healthcare section now group that my colleague is involved with. Yep. And we're looking at ways of understanding that sort of thing and potentially mitigate. And I'm on as kind of like an ethics consultant, I guess. I mean, I'm sort of a PI of the project, but it's a fairly loosely defined project. I don't get any money for this. I'm just there as an interest-based thing. So, I mean, that's my conflict of interest thing, right? But yeah, it's going to be an interesting project. It's still in its infancy, but I think it'll be really interesting. And we're also working with a very large video game company, which I can talk about it because we've had press releases. So we're actually working with Unity. And we actually, we're working with their Unity analytics. We get the data anonymized and basically processed Unity analytics data where we can look at their transactions. So we look at in-app purchases. We've got all the transactions, so I think going back for several years now. And we're looking at one of the projects actually that my husband is doing for his PhD is on this project. Very complicated, but he's looking at financial well-being, and what, and like things like heavy gameplay. What actually does heavy gameplay look like, and how does that correlate with potentially with heavy transactional microtransaction use, for example. So I think it'll be a really interesting project, but this is stuff we've only really just navigated through all of the hoops to actually get access to this data after a lot of, and so we're still at the point where we're just like, oh, there's so much stuff to look at, So yeah, but it's coming out, and that's definitely one of the things that we want to look at is, the what we call heavy, what is called, we don't, it's very a complex concept, but what is often called heavy gaming or problematic gaming, and the financial burden of that.
I know free to play has in some business models has the concept of, I'm using the term I read from a paper, whales, the ones who will pay for most of the game, and the goal is to get your whales who will just pay all this money, their terms, and then you look at people who will like be incentivized to either try to compete with the whales or try to get things like it. So then they will, and then they can never attain it. I mean, it's one of the reasons I have issues with a lot of games, because I look at DLC. Like one of my favorite game series is The Sims, and I struggle to get back into The Sims 4 because of how much DLC I have to buy to get some of the stuff I want. Like back in The Sims 1, I would pay artists directly for all this stuff. I wasn't paying Maxis or EA for this. Yeah, there's a lot of like things I probably. I like that you mentioned the casinos because James and I are Twitch streamers. We're launching our Twitch stream at some point soon, and Twitch was having an issue along with YouTube. As you know, Catherine, I'm more saying it to the listeners that like where like these influencers would have an audience be like, hey, look at this, we can get all this money, all these things, and they were getting the free rolls or casino things, and it was gambling, but not gambling, and and so much problematic thing. I mean, it's why I have an issue with people with big platforms who don't take responsible look at what are they advocating for, what are they encouraging their audience to do. I was a whole rant on like ethics of platforms. We could
Maybe we should come back and talk about that one. I mean, just on the whale thing, you'll be interested to know we've actually just got a paper coming out very soon where we actually dispel the myths of whales. There are no whales. There are other things, but not whales. So it's actually a whole spectrum that isn't just minnows and whales, and it's actually really interesting. And we will be publishing that soon, hopefully. Maybe even, actually, it should be in the January edition, I think, of our of the new ACM Games Journal that's just coming out.
And you had mentioned Anil Dash, who part of NFT. I followed Anil for years because Anil was one of the owned Six Apart who did movable type, and people were having trouble with movable type and their control, and that's why they branched off into something into an open source project. That eventually made WordPress. And fun fact, I'm actually in the copyright of WordPress because I contributed to the core when I was a 12-year-old. I have my 12-year-old alias in the WordPress codex or in the actual WordPress copyright. And yeah, but it was like they were having trouble with like Six Apart was like having some control over movable type. It wasn't letting them do some of the things, or it was, and someone said, hey, what if I just went into open source and made what we now have as WordPress? It's always cool to see when people go up against these corporations who it may have started out with the best intentions, but you run into these issues and they then make it where now so many WordPress sites have been made that for so many different topics and people have been given a voice.
Oh yeah.
But let's just not go too far and put everything on the blockchain, because that's a little bit too, I mean, innovation's great, but you need to think about what's got, further down the line. I mean, what actual problem is this solving, right? And this one definitely had a very specific problem, right? Whereas a lot of the blockchain stuff is really just hiding. It's saying it has a problem to solve, but what actually it's just a smokescreen for the fact that the people who are running it want to make a lot of money, or for the most part. So,
yes, absolutely.
It's a very good point. I think one of the biggest, for me at least, the biggest ethical things to consider in technology is this solving a problem, or is this contributing to or creating a problem? And, we think of things like Mastodon. Mastodon's been around a lot longer than this whole Twitter incident, but Mastodon does give a lot more control. PixelFed, which I think PixelFed's a lot more recent than Mastodon. I love PixelFed because it allows me to share photos that I want to share without being encumbered by Meta. So it solves that problem. Things like, we look at Squadcast, which we're using right now. Squadcast solves the problem of how do you do high quality recordings over the internet in a simple way that guests, like Catherine, I've not had to ask you to do anything apart from jump into a web link to record this episode.
Yeah, to be fair, I've also used Squadcast in the past, but it was very easy. Yeah, and this is the reason I used it too, right? Because I was actually also getting guests on that didn't know anything about podcasting, and like getting them to set up an Audacity with and hitting, go at the same time and all that. Yeah, you've done it all. I can see the looks on your faces.
Yes.
Yeah, you've done that too. Yeah, I mean, that was the old school way of doing it though, right? That's the old school.
Skype, using call recorder on a Mac.
Yeah, exactly.
And projects like, things like Tailscale for really simple VPN connectivity. Projects like that are generally solving tech issues, making things easier are great. But when it just comes to, here's a way for people to make more, I'm going to be really blunt about this, for the rich to keep on making more money and the poor to keep on getting taken advantage of. It's my biggest problem in society at the moment. We just literally yesterday, a Tory MP said that the NHS nurses who are going on strike, rightfully so, I don't like the idea of healthcare workers going on strike, but if they're not getting paid properly, he said that they should not go on strike because it will aid Putin's cause in the Ukraine.
Yeah, this is a fellow who has like £1 million farms and claims all his expenses back from the taxpayer and all this, right? Like, I mean, just the audacity of it grinds my gears. I could say much worse, but I'll keep this a family-friendly channel.
Thank you. No, we appreciate. I think we've done quite well to keep this concise. Well, I say concise. We've got an hour and a half of recording, but look. I always say I'm always happy to go over our sort of aim of an hour, because when we've got something that's so important, and what I hope, folks, is that you found this a positive, engaging discussion. Not, we've not brought on a crypto bro to argue with Catherine. I think Catherine would have killed me if I'd actually done that.
No, actually, I would have probably stomped all over them and been quite happy to do so. But I probably wouldn't have. I probably.
I'm sorry, James. I'm sorry.
I'm getting rid of that audio interface.
What I wouldn't have appreciated is all of their followers suddenly like spamming me, telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about, and all the usual stuff they say.
So,
Jay, your face.
Jay's face is just like, yeah. So, before we sort of do the outros, I want to say one thing, and it's something, whenever we talk about something that maybe will spark opinion, the Crosswire's sort of rule on engaging with us on social media and on our blog in terms of comments, if you can't be respectful to me, to Jay, and to our guests, we really don't want your comments on our site. They will get deleted, and where appropriate, I will be really blunt about this. If anyone is ever abusive to me, to Jay, or to a guest, and we have enough evidence to locate you, we'll do a Liam Neeson. We won't kill you. We will report. Seriously, I have zero tolerance on abuse. That said, and Catherine's now looking at me like, do I really want to be here? Catherine, thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful. Where can people, obviously you're not on Twitter anymore, so you are on Mastodon. Where can people find out a bit more about your work? Where can we point people for a few resources?
Yeah, so, I'm on Mastodon. I'm at Catherine Flick at mastodon.me.uk. I am still on Twitter technically, but that will just point you to Mastodon. So I'm at Catherine Flick on Twitter. I just pop in there occasionally to see how the dumpster fire is going, but it's, really just to maintain a presence so that people don't impersonate me, basically. Yeah. Otherwise you can find my website is, liedra.net, liedra.net. And, from that you can, by this time this goes out, I should have updated the links. So it actually links to my blog, which is also on the Fediverse, which is at cflick@blog.liedra.net. So you can follow that from Mastodon, which is really cool. I love this stuff. I love tinkering.
Out of interest, what are you using for? Are you using micro.blog by any chance for your?
No, it's Write. It's Write Freely, which powers Write as. Yeah. So it was a bit of a faff, but it was worth it. So, but yeah, that's. Pretty much just Google my name, Catherine with a C, Flick, Flick. You'll find me.
Fantastic, and thank you again, Catherine. And Jay, do you want to hit the big button and we'll roll the outro?
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Crosswires. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So please drop us a note over to podcast@crosswires.net.
You can also drop us a comment on the post, or if you're a good pod user, why not start a discussion there too?
You can also join our new Discord server at crosswires.net/Discord. We've got forum channels for each episode, and we'd love you to join the discussion there. You can also follow us on Mastodon at crosswires at masthead.social. And of course, you can find the show in all the good podcast apps, and all the really bad ones too.
If you'd like to check out more of our content, head on over to crosswires.net/YouTube for all our videos, and keep an eye on our Twitch channel at crosswires.net/live for our upcoming streams.
If you like what you heard, please do drop a review in your podcast directory of choice. It really does help spread the word about the show.
And of course, if you can spare even the smallest amount of financial support, we'd be incredibly grateful. You can support us at ko-fi.com/crosswires. That is ko-fi.com/crosswires.
Until next time, thanks for listening.